The harvest moon hung low over the South Dakota prairie when Katherine Novak first noticed the man watching her from across the dusty street of Yankton. And something in his steady gaze made her heart skip in a way that frightened and thrilled her all at once. It was September of 1882, and the town bustled with the energy of harvest season. Wagons loaded with golden corn rolling through the main thoroughfare while merchants called out their wares, and cowhands fresh off the trail kicked up dust with their boots. Katherine had come to town with her father to purchase supplies for their homestead, a modest plot of land 10 miles west where they grew corn and wheat, scraping out a living from the stubborn prairie soil that fought them every season. The man was tall, lean in the way of someone who spent long days in the saddle, and even from a distance, Katherine could see the confident set of his shoulders beneath a worn leather vest. He touched the brim of his hat when their eyes met, a small gesture of acknowledgement that sent warmth flooding through her chest, despite her best efforts to remain composed. At 22, Katherine had received her share of attention from local men, but she had turned them all away, too focused on helping her father keep their farm running after her mother had passed 3 winters ago. The work was endless, and there was little time for the foolishness of courtship. Her father, Joseph Novak, emerged from the general store with a sack of flour hoisted over his shoulder, his weathered face creased with the permanent squint of a man who spent his life facing the sun. He followed Katherine's gaze across the street and grunted. "That is Harrison Xander," he said in his thick accent, remnants of the Czech homeland he had left 20 years ago still coloring his words. "Works on the Double R Ranch. Good reputation, they say. Works hard." Katherine tore her eyes away from the cowboy and busied herself loading the supplies into their wagon. "I am sure he does," she said, keeping her voice neutral though her pulse still raced. "He is looking at you," her father observed with the bluntness that often made Katherine want to sink into the ground. "Papa, please," she murmured, but when she could not help herself and glanced back across the street, Harrison Xander was indeed still watching her. This time he smiled, a slow, easy expression that transformed his sun-bronzed face from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. Before she could look away again, he was crossing the street, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. Katherine's hands froze on the crate she had been lifting, and she was suddenly acutely aware of the dust on her simple calico dress and the strands of dark hair that had escaped her braid. "Afternoon," Harrison said, his voice a warm baritone that seemed to resonate in Katherine's chest. He nodded respectfully to her father before his hazel eyes returned to her. "Could not help but notice you folks seem to be loading up for harvest season. Name is Harrison Xander. I work over at the Double R, but I have been thinking about settling my own piece of land soon." Joseph set down his flour sack and extended a work-roughened hand. "Joseph Novak, this is my daughter, Katherine." He said her name the way he always did, with a slight emphasis on the second syllable that marked it as distinctly foreign to American ears. Katherine managed a polite smile and a small nod, not trusting her voice to remain steady. Up close, Harrison was even more striking, with sun-lightened brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and small creases at the corners of his eyes from squinting at distant horizons. There was a steadiness about him, a quiet confidence that suggested he was a man who knew exactly who he was and what he wanted from life. "Pleased to meet you both," Harrison said. His gaze lingered on Katherine for a moment longer than strictly proper before he addressed her father again. "The reason I came over, besides good manners, is that I heard you might be looking for an extra hand. Harvest season is rough with just 2 people working the fields." Katherine's father rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Word travels fast." I mentioned to Miller at the feed store that we could use help, yes. My back is not what it used to be. Papa, Katherine protested, hating the admission of weakness even though she knew it was true. Her father had been moving more slowly lately, and the heavy work of harvest worried her. Just last week she had found him leaning against the barn, pale and breathing hard, though he had waved away her concern. "Is the truth, Katherine," Joseph said firmly. "Pride does not bring in the corn." He turned back to Harrison. "You want work. The pay is not much, but the food is good and honest." Harrison's smile widened. "I've got some time before the winter season gets too rough. The double R does not need all hands right now, so the foreman said I could take on outside work if I wanted. I would be happy to help, and I am not worried about the pay. Just looking to learn more about farming operations before I try to stake my own claim." And so it was settled, with a handshake and an agreement that Harrison would ride out to their homestead come Monday morning. As Katherine and her father drove their wagon out of Yankton, she could not resist looking back to see Harrison still standing in the street, watching them go. When he raised his hand in farewell, she felt a flutter in her stomach that she tried very hard to ignore. "He seems like a good man," her father said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "Perhaps," Katherine replied carefully. "Your mother, God rest her soul, she would want to see you happy." Settled, Katherine's throat tightened at the mention of her mother. "I am happy, Papa. We have the farm, we have each other. That is enough." Her father made a non-committal sound but did not press further, for which Katherine was grateful. The truth was more complicated than she wanted to admit, even to herself. She did feel lonely sometimes, especially in the quiet hours of evening when the work was done, and she sat mending clothes by lamplight while her father dozed in his chair. She wondered what it might be like to have someone to talk to share the burdens and joys of daily life. But she also feared the vulnerability that came with caring for someone, the risk of loss that had devastated her when her mother died. The homestead came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. The small house her father had built stood sturdy and square, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the late afternoon light. Behind it stretched their fields, row upon row of corn standing tall and full, ready for harvest. The barn leaned slightly to the left, a problem her father kept meaning to fix, and chickens scratched in the yard near the well. It was not much, but it was theirs, paid for with sweat and determination and her mother's tireless work in the years before illness took her. Katherine felt the familiar swell of pride mixed with melancholy as she climbed down from the wagon. This land was her heritage, her responsibility, and she would do whatever necessary to keep it thriving. Monday morning dawned clear and cool, the first real hint of autumn in the air. Katherine had been up before sunrise, as was her habit, starting the fire in the kitchen stove and putting coffee on to boil. She made biscuits and fried eggs and thick slices of bacon, telling herself the substantial breakfast was for her father and had nothing to do with their expected visitor. She changed her dress twice before settling on a simple blue cotton that she told herself was practical and not at all chosen because it brought out her eyes. Her father watched this flurry of activity with barely concealed amusement, but wisely said nothing. He had finished his own breakfast and was nursing a second cup of coffee when the sound of hoofbeats announced Harrison's arrival. Katherine's heart jumped as she watched through the window while Harrison dismounted from a handsome chestnut gelding and looped the reins over the hitching post near the barn. He wore work clothes, simple denim trousers and a brown shirt with the sleeves already rolled up, and he moved with the easy efficiency of someone accustomed to physical labor. When he saw her watching, he smiled and waved, and Katherine quickly stepped back from the window, feeling foolish. Joseph went out to greet him while Katherine busied herself with clearing the breakfast dishes, trying to calm her nerves. What was wrong with her? She was acting like a silly girl instead of a grown woman who had been running a household for 3 years. When her father brought Harrison into the kitchen, she turned with what she hoped was a composed expression. "Good morning, Miss Novak," Harrison said, removing his hat and holding it respectfully. His hair was slightly damp, suggesting he had made an effort to clean up before riding over, and Katherine noticed he had shaved recently. "Good morning, Mr. Xander. There is coffee and biscuits if you would like." "That would be mighty appreciated, thank you." Katherine poured him coffee and set out the remaining biscuits with butter and preserves, hyper-aware of his presence in their small kitchen. He seemed to fill the space somehow, not with arrogance but with a vitality that made everything feel more vivid. When their hands accidentally touched as she handed him the coffee cup, the contact sent a shock up her arm that she felt all the way to her toes. "Good strong coffee," Harrison said after taking a sip. "My mother always said you could judge a household by its coffee." "Your family is from around here?" Joseph asked, settling back into his chair. "Texas originally. My father worked cattle down near San Antonio. He passed when I was 16 and my mother followed a few years later. I have been working ranches since then, saving up to start my own place." Harrison's expression grew distant for a moment, touched with old grief, and Katherine felt a pang of recognition. Loss was something she understood intimately. "Hard to lose your parents young," Joseph said quietly, "but you honor them by working hard and making something of yourself." "That is what I aim to do, sir." They finished their coffee and headed out to the fields, where the corn stood ready for harvest. Joseph explained their system, such as it was with only 2 workers. They would cut the stalks, strip the ears, and load everything into the wagon to be taken to the barn where the real work would begin, husking the corn and preparing it for storage or sale. Harrison listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was genuinely interested in learning. As they began work, Katherine found herself stealing glances at him, watching the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he swung the corn knife, the efficiency of his movements. He worked tirelessly, keeping pace with her father and occasionally looking over to catch Katherine's eye with a smile that made her stomach flutter. By midday, they had made significant progress, and Katherine called them in for the noon meal. She had prepared a hearty stew with bread and cold milk from the springhouse, and the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table in companionable silence, too hungry and tired for much conversation. Harrison complimented her cooking with such sincere appreciation that Katherine felt herself blushing. "This is mighty fine stew, Miss Novak. Best I have had in a long while. It is nothing special, just beef and vegetables." "The best cooking does not need to be fancy," Harrison said. "Just made with care, and I can tell you care about things. Can see it in how you keep your home, how you work the fields." Katherine did not know how to respond to such direct praise, so she busied herself with cutting more bread. But she felt pleased nonetheless, warmed by his words in a way that went beyond simple flattery. The afternoon passed in a blur of physical labor, the repetitive motion of cutting and stripping corn, the growing pile of golden ears in the wagon. Katherine worked alongside the men, her hands moving with the practiced ease of experience. She had been doing this since she was a girl, and while the work was hard, there was something satisfying about it, the tangible results of effort. As the sun began to sink lower, Joseph wiped his brow and announced he needed to check on a section of fence that had been giving him trouble. "You 2 keep working here," he said. "I will be back before dark." Katherine watched her father walk toward the far pasture with a mixture of suspicion and amusement. The fence had been fine yesterday, and she suspected this was his not particularly subtle way of giving her time alone with Harrison. She should have been annoyed, but instead, she felt a nervous anticipation flutter in her chest. For a few minutes, they worked in silence, the only sounds the rustle of corn stalks and the occasional call of a bird settling in for the evening. Then Harrison spoke, his voice casual but with an undercurrent of something deeper. "Your father is not very subtle, is he?" Katherine could not help but laugh, a surprised sound that burst out before she could stop it. "No, he is not. I apologize for his matchmaking. He means well. Nothing to apologize for." Harrison paused in his work and looked at her directly, his hazel eyes serious. "Truth is, I am grateful for the excuse to talk to you proper. Been thinking about you since I saw you in town Saturday." Katherine's hands stilled on the corn she had been husking. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You do not know anything about me. I know you work hard. I know you are kind to your father and take care of him. I know you make the best stew in Dakota Territory." His lips quirked in a small smile. "And I know that when you smile, which you do not do nearly enough, it is like the sun coming out. Mr. Xander, Harrison, please. And I am not trying to make you uncomfortable, Miss Novak. Just being honest about my intentions. I am 26 years old and I have worked hard all my life. I am ready to settle down, build something permanent. When I saw you, something just clicked into place, like I had been looking for something without knowing it, and suddenly there it was." Katherine's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such straightforward sincerity. The young men who had courted her before had been awkward and fumbling, more interested in her father's land than in her. But Harrison looked at her like she was something precious, something worth pursuing for her own sake. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Do not say anything yet. I know this is sudden, but I would like permission to court you proper, if you are willing. I will be working here through harvest season anyway, so you will have plenty of time to get to know me and decide if you might feel the same way I do." "And how is it that you feel?" Katherine asked, emboldened by his honesty to seek her own answers. "Like I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you smile," Harrison said simply. The words hung in the air between them, weighty with promise. Katherine looked at this man who had appeared in her life so suddenly, this stranger who was quickly becoming less strange with every passing moment. She thought about the loneliness that had become her constant companion, the nights she lay awake wondering if this was all there would ever be. She thought about her mother, who had always told her that life was too short not to take chances on happiness. "Yes," she said softly, "you may court me, but I make no promises beyond that." Harrison's face broke into a grin so bright and genuine that Katherine could not help but smile back. "That is all I ask. A chance." They returned to work, but everything felt different now, charged with new possibility. When their hands brushed reaching for the same corn stalk, neither pulled away immediately. When Harrison told her stories about his time working ranches across the territory, Katherine laughed freely, enjoying his dry humor and the self-deprecating way he recounted his misadventures. When she shared memories of her mother, he listened with complete attention, his eyes soft with understanding. By the time her father returned, full dark had fallen and they had moved the day's harvest into the barn. Joseph took one look at their faces and nodded with satisfaction but said nothing, for which Katherine was grateful. That night, after Harrison had ridden back to his quarters at the Double R Ranch, Katherine lay in bed replaying every word of their conversation, every smile, every moment their eyes had met. Sleep was a long time coming, but when it did, she dreamed of golden cornfields and strong, gentle hands. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and strangely natural. Harrison arrived each morning just after dawn and worked alongside them until dusk. He proved to be exactly what he had claimed, a tireless worker with a genuine interest in learning every aspect of farming. He asked Joseph detailed questions about crop rotation, soil quality, irrigation, and weather patterns, storing away knowledge like a squirrel preparing for winter. But it was the time he spent talking with Katherine that transformed the long workdays into something she found herself anticipating with increasing eagerness. During their brief breaks, they would sit in the shade of the barn and share stories from their pasts. Katherine learned that Harrison had taught himself to read and write using his mother's Bible and whatever newspapers he could get his hands on. He told her about the first time he had broken a wild horse, about near disasters in stampedes and river crossings, about the vast beauty of the open range under an endless sky. In turn, Katherine shared pieces of herself she had not realized she wanted to reveal. She told him about her mother's herb garden, which she still maintained, and how her mother had taught her to read the weather by watching the animals. She confessed her fear that she was not strong enough to keep the farm running, that she was failing her parents' legacy. Harrison listened without judgment, then gently challenged her self-doubt, pointing out everything she had already accomplished. "Your father could not do this without you," he said one afternoon as they sat resting against the barn wall. "And from what I can see, you are the backbone of this whole operation. You should be proud. I just do what needs doing. That is what makes you remarkable. You do not complain or make excuses. You just do the work." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I admire that. I admire you." Katherine looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. 3 weeks ago, this man had been a stranger. Now she could not imagine her days without him in them. As September gave way to October, the harvest work intensified. The corn needed to be brought in before the weather turned, and there were still acres of it standing in the fields. One evening, after a particularly long day, Joseph announced that they would need to work through the night to finish husking the corn they had already brought in. A storm was coming. He could feel it in his bones, and they could not afford to lose any of the harvest to moisture and rot. "I will make supper and put on plenty of coffee," Katherine said, already mentally planning the meal and supplies they would need. "I will help with the husking all night if needed," Harrison offered immediately. "No sense in you two doing this alone." And so, as the sun set on that October evening, they prepared for a long night's work. Katherine made a huge pot of beef and beans, along with several pans of cornbread and a large pot of coffee that she would keep refilling throughout the night. They carried lanterns out to the barn where the unhusked corn was piled high, golden ears still wrapped in their green and brown leaves. The work of husking corn was tedious but not particularly difficult. It required stripping away the dry husks to reveal the kernels beneath, then tossing the naked ears into bushel baskets for storage. It was the kind of work that allowed for conversation. And as they settled into the rhythm of it, the atmosphere in the barn became almost cozy despite the late hour. Joseph worked for several hours, but eventually his age and the long weeks of harvest caught up with him. "I am going to rest for a bit," he said, stifling a yawn. "You two keep working. Wake me in a few hours and I will take another shift." Katherine suspected her father was once again manufacturing an excuse to leave her alone with Harrison, but she also saw the genuine exhaustion in his lined face. "Go rest, Papa. We will manage." After Joseph had retired to the house, Katherine and Harrison continued working side by side, their hands moving in steady rhythm. The lantern light cast a warm glow over the barn, creating an intimate bubble of illumination in the dark night. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the gaps in the barn walls and carrying the scent of approaching rain. "Tell me something," Harrison said after a while. "What do you want for your future? If you could have anything, what would it be?" Katherine considered the question as she stripped the husk from another ear of corn. "I want this farm to thrive. I want to honor my parents' work and sacrifice. Beyond that, I suppose I want what most people want: a family, children, someone to share life with." She paused, then added softly, "I want to not be lonely anymore." Harrison set down the ear he had been working on and turned to face her fully. In the lantern light, his eyes were serious and intent. "Katherine, I need to tell you something, and I hope you will not think I am rushing things or being presumptuous." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "These past weeks working here, getting to know you, have been the best of my life. I wake up every morning excited to ride over here, not because of the work but because I get to see you. Every conversation we have, every smile you give me, feels like a gift." He took a deep breath. "I know it has not been very long, but time does not change how I feel. Some things you just know, deep down where it matters." "Harrison," Katherine whispered, not sure if she was warning him to stop or encouraging him to continue. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "Maybe I have already fallen. And I know you might not feel the same way yet, might need more time, and that is all right. But I could not go another day without telling you. Life is too uncertain, too full of things we cannot control. The only thing I can control is being honest about what is in my heart." Katherine set down her own corn, her hands trembling slightly. The words she had been holding back, afraid to acknowledge even to herself, suddenly demanded to be spoken. "You are not alone in those feelings," she said. "I have been trying not to fall in love with you because it frightens me. When my mother died, I saw what it did to my father. The pain of losing someone you love that much, it nearly destroyed him. I told myself I would not risk that kind of pain." "But," Harrison prompted gently, "but I think I have been lonely long enough, and I think maybe love is worth the risk." She looked up and met his eyes. "I think I might be falling in love with you too." The smile that spread across Harrison's face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Katherine breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Katherine felt something inside her unfurl, like a flower that had been waiting for spring. The kiss deepened, and she leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, and Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "Katherine Novak, would you do me the honor of marrying me?" The words hung in the air between them, enormous and life-changing. Katherine's mind raced. They had known each other for less than 2 months. By any reasonable standard, this was too fast, too sudden. But her heart, which had been locked away for so long, insisted that this was right. She thought about her mother's advice to take chances on happiness. She thought about how empty her life had felt before Harrison rode into it. She thought about the future she wanted and realized she wanted it with him. "Yes," she said, and then laughed at the shock and joy that flooded his face. "Yes, I will marry you." Harrison let out a whoop of delight and picked her up, spinning her around in the lantern-lit barn while she laughed and clung to his shoulders. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time with a passion that made her knees weak. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, while outside the wind howled and the first drops of rain began to fall. "We should probably tell your father," Harrison said eventually, though he made no move to let her go. Probably, Katherine agreed, equally reluctant to break the embrace. He will likely say he saw this coming a mile away. Smart man, your father. They returned to their corn husking, but everything had changed. Now they worked with their shoulders touching, stealing kisses between ears of corn, planning their future in breathless whispers. Harrison wanted to buy land adjacent to her father's farm and combine the properties. They would build a new house, bigger than the current one, with room for the children they both wanted. Katherine found herself spinning dreams she had thought lost, allowing herself to imagine a life full of love and laughter and shared purpose. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, they finished the last of the husking. The storm her father had predicted was fully upon them now, rain drumming on the barn roof in a steady rhythm. But inside, the corn was safe and dry, hundreds of bushels ready for storage or market. Joseph emerged from the house as the sun rose, looking refreshed and unsurprised to find Katherine and Harrison standing close together, holding hands. "So," he said, trying and failing to hide his smile. "Do you have something to tell me, sir?" Harrison said formally, straightening but not releasing Katherine's hand. "I have asked your daughter to marry me, and she has accepted. I know this is fast, but my intentions are honorable and my feelings are true. I promise I will work hard to provide for her and make her happy, and I hope I have your blessing." Joseph looked between them, his weathered face soft with emotion. "You have been like a son to me these past weeks, Harrison. I see how you look at my Katherine, and I see how she looks at you. This is what her mother would have wanted. Of course, you have my blessing." Katherine flew into her father's arms, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Papa. You will be happy," Joseph said, his own voice thick with tears. "This I know. You have found a good man, and he has found a good woman. This is how it should be." The three of them stood there in the doorway of the barn as the rain fell and the morning broke, bound together by affection and the promise of the future. Katherine leaned against Harrison's solid warmth and felt, for the first time since her mother's death, that everything was going to be all right. Better than all right. She was going to be happy. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity and planning. News of the engagement spread through Yankton with the speed that gossip always traveled in small communities. The general store owner's wife appointed herself as an unofficial advisor on wedding preparations, offering Katherine advice on everything from dress fabrics to cake recipes. The minister at the small Lutheran church they attended was delighted to perform the ceremony, and immediately began planning an elaborate service that Katherine had to gently scale back to something more modest. Harrison officially gave notice at the Double R Ranch, and his foreman, a gruff but fair man named Pete, took the news with good humor. "Figured you would get yourself hitched sooner or later," Pete said, clapping Harrison on the shoulder. "That Novak girl is a catch. You are a lucky man." "Do not I know it," Harrison replied. They set the wedding date for early November, after the harvest was fully completed, but before the winter weather made travel too difficult. Katherine wanted a simple ceremony with just close friends and neighbors, nothing fancy or elaborate. She was getting married for love, not for show, and the trappings seemed unimportant compared to the substance of what they were building together. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, Harrison and Katherine would walk the boundaries of the adjoining property he was purchasing, planning where they would build their house and how they would expand the farming operation. Harrison had saved a surprising amount of money from his years of ranch work, and combined with what Katherine and her father had put aside, they had enough to make a solid start. "I am thinking we could put the house on that rise there," Harrison said one evening, pointing to a gentle slope that overlooked both properties. "Good drainage, and you would be able to see your father's place from the front porch." "I like that," Katherine said, imagining the view. "And we could plant an orchard on the south side. My mother always wanted apple trees." "Apple trees it is." Harrison pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what?" "For saying yes. For taking a chance on me. For making me the happiest man in Dakota Territory." Katherine turned in his arms and kissed him, still marveling at how natural this felt, how right. "I should be thanking you. You brought joy back into my life when I thought I had forgotten how to feel it." As October waned and November approached, Katherine found herself counting down the days to the wedding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She sewed her wedding dress herself, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored silk that she had splurged on from a traveling merchant. Her father watched her preparations with a bittersweet expression, happy for her future but sad at the change it represented. "You will still be close by," Katherine reminded him one evening as she hemmed her dress. "Just a few hundred yards away. I know, but it will not be the same. You have been my companion these past years, since your mother passed. I will miss having you here." Katherine set down her sewing and went to kneel beside her father's chair. "I will visit every day, and you will eat supper with us most nights. I insist on it. You are not losing me, Papa. You are gaining a son." Joseph patted her hand, his eyes damp. "Your mother would be so proud of you, of the woman you have become, of the choice you are making. Harrison is a good man." "The best," Katherine agreed softly. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp November morning where your breath clouded in the air and frost sparkled on every surface. Katherine woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep, and began her preparations. She had invited her closest friend, Molly Harper, to help her dress and arrange her hair. Molly was the schoolteacher in Yankton, a cheerful woman of about 30 who had been one of the few people to show Katherine kindness after her mother died. "You look absolutely beautiful," Molly declared as she finished pinning Katherine's dark hair into an elegant upswept style, with a few soft tendrils framing her face. "Harrison is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." Katherine studied herself in the small mirror and barely recognized her own reflection. Her eyes were bright with happiness, her cheeks flushed with excitement. The cream silk dress fit her perfectly, nipped in at the waist and flowing to the floor. She felt beautiful, but more than that, she felt ready. Ready for this new chapter, ready to build a life with Harrison, ready to open her heart fully to another person. The ceremony was held at the Lutheran Church, a modest white building with a tall steeple that could be seen from miles around. Despite Katherine's wishes for a small affair, it seemed like half of Yankton had turned out to witness the wedding. Farmers and ranchers and merchants filled the pews, all dressed in their Sunday best and eager to celebrate. When Katherine walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw only Harrison waiting for her at the altar. He wore a new suit, the first she had ever seen him in, and he looked almost unbearably handsome. But it was the expression on his face that made her heart swell. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, like he could not quite believe his good fortune. Tears glinted in his eyes, and when she reached him and he took her hand, his grip was warm and steady and sure. The minister began the ceremony with a prayer, and Katherine barely heard the words, too focused on Harrison's face and the feeling of rightness that filled her chest. When it came time for the vows, Harrison spoke as clearly and firmly, promising to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Katherine's voice trembled slightly with emotion as she made the same promises, but she meant every word with her entire being. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said with a beaming smile. "Harrison, you may kiss your bride." And he did, sweetly and thoroughly, while the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Katherine laughed against his lips, giddy with joy and relief and the sheer rightness of it all. They walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, and stepping out into the cold November sunshine felt like stepping into an entirely new life. The reception was held at the Yankton Community Hall, a large room that served for everything from town meetings to dances. Long tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by various neighbors. There was roasted venison and beef, bowls of potatoes and vegetables from autumn gardens, fresh bread and pies and cakes of every description. Someone had brought a fiddle and another person a guitar, and soon music filled the air. Katherine found herself swept into dance after dance, first with Harrison, then with her father, then with various neighbors and friends who wanted to offer their congratulations. She laughed and twirled and let herself be completely, unreservedly happy. Every time she caught sight of Harrison across the room, he was watching her with that same look of wonder and love, and her heart would skip a beat. Finally, as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Harrison claimed her for another dance. This time, instead of the energetic reels they had been dancing, the musicians played something slow and sweet. Harrison held her close, one hand at her waist and the other cradling hers against his chest. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Xander?" he asked, and Katherine thrilled at the sound of her new name. "Like I might wake up any moment and find this was all a dream." "It is real," Harrison assured her. "You are my wife and I am your husband, and we have the rest of our lives ahead of us." "The rest of our lives," Katherine repeated wonderingly. "What do you think that will look like?" "Well, tonight we will go to our new house, which your father and I have been secretly preparing while you were busy with wedding plans." Katherine pulled back to look at him in surprise. "You have?" "But the house is not supposed to be ready for months," Harrison grinned. "We have been working extra hours. It is not completely finished, but there is one room that is done, with a bed and a stove and everything we need to start our life together. The rest we will finish together in our own time." Tears pricked Katherine's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "You did that for me, for us. I wanted us to have our own space from the very first night, a place that is just ours, where we can begin building all our dreams." As the sun set on their wedding day, Katherine and Harrison made their farewells to the lingering well-wishers and rode together to the rise where their new house stood. True to Harrison's word, the structure was partially complete, the frame solid and the roof on, though the interior walls were still unfinished. But one room was indeed fully done, a cozy space with gleaming new wood floors, a cast iron stove radiating warmth, and a beautiful brass bed covered in quilts. "It is perfect," Katherine breathed, looking around at their first home. Harrison carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture, and set her down gently. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "I love you," he said against her lips. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days after." "I love you too," Katherine whispered back. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up when I was too afraid to let myself feel." They spent their wedding night in each other's arms, discovering the joy and intimacy of marriage, whispering promises and dreams in the darkness. Outside, the November wind howled across the prairie, but inside their small, completed room, they were warm and safe and completely content. The months that followed were a time of adjustment and growth as Katherine settled into married life. True to her promise, she visited her father almost daily, often bringing him meals or helping with small tasks around his place. But her evenings now belonged to Harrison, and she found herself treasuring those hours they spent together. Winter set in with the harsh beauty typical of the Dakota plains. Snow blanketed the ground, and temperatures plunged below zero. Work on completing the house slowed but did not stop entirely. On days when the weather permitted, Harrison would work on interior walls or install windows, while Katherine sewed curtains and planned the layout of rooms. They developed rhythms and routines that became the foundation of their shared life. Katherine would wake early to make breakfast while Harrison tended the animals they had acquired: chickens, a milk cow, and 2 horses. They would eat together, planning the day's work, then go their separate ways until noon, when they would reconvene for a simple lunch. Evenings were spent by the fire, Harrison often reading aloud from newspapers or books while Katherine sewed or knitted. What surprised Katherine most was how much she enjoyed the companionship. She had been alone with her grief and responsibility for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to share life with. Harrison made her laugh with his dry observations about their neighbors or his stories from his cowboy days. He listened when she needed to talk, offered comfort when the memories of her mother brought tears, and celebrated small victories with genuine enthusiasm. In February, as the worst of winter began to ease, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she dismissed it as stress or the physical demands of establishing a new household, but when another month passed with no sign, she could no longer deny the truth. She was carrying Harrison's child. The realization filled her with a complicated mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the prospect of starting their family, but also fear, remembering all too well the dangers of childbirth. Her mother had lost 2 babies before Katherine was born, and Katherine knew several women in the area who had died bringing children into the world. She decided to tell Harrison that evening over supper. He had been working hard all day, finishing the walls in what would be their kitchen, and he sat across from her at their small table looking content and tired. Katherine pushed her food around her plate, trying to find the right words. "You are not eating," Harrison observed. "Are you feeling well? Actually, that is what I need to talk to you about." Katherine took a deep breath. "Harrison, I think I am with child." His fork clattered to his plate, and for a moment he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing wider and brighter until his whole face seemed to glow with joy. "Truly, you are certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Harrison was out of his chair in an instant, pulling her up and into his arms, spinning her around the room. "We are going to have a baby. Katherine, this is wonderful, amazing, the best news possible." His enthusiasm was contagious, and Katherine found her own fears easing as she laughed at his excitement. "You are happy then?" "Happy. I am overjoyed, thrilled. Thank you, my darling girl, thank you for this incredible gift." He kissed her thoroughly, and when they finally pulled apart, Katherine saw tears on his cheeks. "What is wrong?" she asked, alarmed. "Nothing. Everything is right. I am just so happy I can hardly stand it. A baby, our baby." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your papa is already so in love with you." That night, they lay in bed making plans and spinning dreams about their growing family. Harrison insisted that Katherine would need to rest more, that he would take on additional work to spare her. Katherine, practical as always, pointed out that she was pregnant, not ill, and could continue with most of her normal activities for many months yet. "But you will let me take care of you," Harrison insisted. "And your father and I will handle the heavy work." "You already handle the heavy work." "But yes, I will let you fuss over me if it makes you happy." "It does. You and this baby are my whole world now. I will do whatever it takes to keep you both safe and healthy." True to his word, Harrison became even more attentive and protective as Katherine's pregnancy progressed. He brought her breakfast in bed on mornings when she felt queasy, rubbed her feet when they ached, and read to her in the evenings with his hand resting on her growing belly. Joseph, upon learning he would be a grandfather, was equally delighted and began building a cradle with such care and attention to detail that Katherine was moved to tears. Spring came to the prairie in a rush of green and birdsong, and with it came the completion of their house. The last wall went up, the last window was installed, and suddenly they had a full home with a kitchen, parlor, 2 bedrooms, and even a small bathing room, which was quite modern for a frontier home. Katherine spent happy hours arranging their modest furniture and hanging the curtains she had sewn, making the space truly theirs. As her belly swelled with the growing baby, Katherine found herself thinking often about her mother. She wished desperately that her mother could be there to guide her through pregnancy and childbirth, to meet her grandchild. But she also felt her mother's presence in quiet moments, a sense of love and encouragement that helped her through the harder days. Summer arrived hot and golden, and Katherine, now quite visibly pregnant, moved more slowly but continued to work where she could. She tended her growing vegetable garden, preserved fruits and vegetables for the winter, and began sewing tiny gowns and blankets for the baby. Neighbor women stopped by regularly, offering advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and the kind of practical support that frontier communities specialized in. In late August, as the harvest season began again, Katherine's labor pains started. Harrison, who had been jumpy and nervous for weeks anticipating this moment, immediately rode to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Schmidt, an experienced German woman who had delivered half the babies in the county. By the time he returned with her, Katherine's contractions were coming regularly, and she was both terrified and eager to meet her child. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Harrison paced outside the bedroom, alternating between prayer and panic, while Mrs. Schmidt and Molly Harper, who had come to assist, worked with Katherine. Joseph sat with Harrison, offering what comfort he could, his own memories of childbirth's dangers making him equally anxious. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith the following day, Katherine pushed one last time and the baby emerged, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect. "A boy," Mrs. Schmidt announced triumphantly. "A fine, healthy boy." Harrison burst into the room before anyone could stop him, his face streaked with tears. "Katherine, are you all right?" "I am fine," she said, exhausted but radiant. "Come meet your son, Mrs." Schmidt placed the cleaned and wrapped baby in Katherine's arms, and Harrison knelt beside the bed, gazing in wonder at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered. "Absolutely perfect, just like his mother. What should we name him?" Katherine asked, gently touching the baby's tiny hand, which immediately wrapped around her finger. "I would like to name him Joseph," Harrison said, looking up at Katherine. "After your father, if that is all right with you." Tears streamed down Katherine's face. "Joseph Harrison Xander." "It is perfect." When they brought the baby out to meet his grandfather, the old man wept openly, holding his grandson with shaking hands and murmuring blessings in Czech. "Thank you," he said to Katherine and Harrison. "You have given me such a gift, such a gift." The weeks after baby Joseph's birth were exhausting but joyful. Katherine had never known she could love something as fiercely as she loved her son. Every cry, every smile, every tiny movement filled her with wonder. Harrison was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Katherine for feeding, walking the floor for hours when Joseph was fussy, and gazing at his son with an expression of absolute adoration. As autumn arrived and Joseph grew from a tiny newborn into a plump, alert baby, Katherine found herself marveling at how much her life had changed in just over a year. This time last year, she had been alone except for her father, resigned to a life of hard work and loneliness. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, a beautiful son, and a home filled with laughter and joy. One evening in late October, as they sat together watching Joseph sleep in his cradle, Harrison took Katherine's hand. "Do you remember last year at this time, when we husked corn all night and I proposed to you before dawn?" "Of course, I remember. How could I forget? I knew that night that you were the one, that I wanted to spend every day of my life with you. And now look at us. We have built this life, this beautiful life, and I fall more in love with you every single day." Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am so glad I said yes, so glad I took the risk. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. We are just getting started, you know. This is just the beginning of our story." And it was true. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs, but Katherine and Harrison faced them together, their love growing stronger with each passing season. They expanded their farm, adding more acreage and livestock. Joseph grew into a sturdy, cheerful toddler, and was eventually joined by 2 more children, a daughter they named Alina after Katherine's mother, and another son they called Daniel. Katherine's father lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren born, spending his final years surrounded by family and love. When he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, it was a sad but natural ending to a life well lived. They buried him next to Katherine's mother, and Joseph, now a serious 7-year-old, placed wildflowers on both graves. As the years turned into decades, Harrison and Katherine became pillars of the Yankton community. They were known for their successful farm, their happy children, and the enduring love that everyone could see whenever they looked at each other. Neighbors would comment that they had never seen a couple so devoted, so obviously pleased to be together even after 20, 30, 40 years of marriage. When they grew old, their children grown and married with families of their own, Harrison and Katherine would sit on the porch of the house they had built together and watch the sun set over the prairie. Sometimes they would talk, sharing memories and watching grandchildren play in the yard. Sometimes they would simply hold hands in comfortable silence, secure in a love that had stood the test of time. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked one evening when they were both in their 70s, her hair now completely silver and Harrison's face deeply lined by sun and years. "Proposing to me so quickly, taking such a risk on someone you barely knew." Harrison looked at her with eyes that still held the same warmth and love they had held on that long-ago October night in the barn. "Not for a single moment. You were the best decision I ever made. Every day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, the years when crops failed or children were sick or money was tight, especially those days, because we faced them together. That is what love is, Katherine. It is not just the joy, though Lord knows we have had plenty of that. It is the hard times too, knowing you have someone by your side who will never give up, never walk away." Katherine squeezed his hand, her heart full. "I love you, Harrison Xander, then, now, and always. And I love you, Katherine Xander, forever." They sat together as the stars came out, 2 people who had taken a chance on love and found everything they had ever dreamed of and more. The farm they had built stretched out around them, worked now by their children and grandchildren who would carry on the legacy they had begun. The house stood solid and strong, full of decades of memories and laughter and love. When Katherine finally passed away at the age of 84, Harrison held her hand and was the last thing she saw, his face full of love and the promise that they would meet again. He followed her 6 months later, dying peacefully in his sleep, and their children buried them side by side on the rise overlooking the farm where they had begun their life together. The story of Harrison and Katherine Xander became the kind of legend that families passed down through generations. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would hear about how they met, how he proposed after husking corn by lantern light, how they built a life and a love that lasted until the very end. It became the standard by which other romances were measured, a reminder that real love, true love, was not just about passion but about partnership, commitment, and choosing each other every single day. The farm remained in the family, expanding and modernizing with the times, but never losing the essential character that Harrison and Katherine had given it. The house on the rise, carefully maintained and updated, stood as a testament to what two people could build when they worked together with love as their foundation. On the stone that marked their graves, their children had inscribed a simple message that captured the essence of their parents' love story. They husked corn by lantern light, he proposed before the dawn, and they loved each other all their days. It was a simple epitaph for a life that had been equally simple in its deepest truth. Two people had found each other, had taken a chance on love, and had built something beautiful that would echo through the generations. In the end, that was the best legacy anyone could hope for: a life lived fully, a love given freely, and a family that would carry their story forward into the future. The prairie wind still blew across the Dakota plains, carrying the scent of growing corn and the promise of harvest. And if you listened carefully on quiet autumn nights, you might almost hear the whisper of two voices, laughing together in the darkness, still husking corn by lantern light, still in love after all these years.